Every now and then it seems like an indie game comes along that people talk about as if it's the second coming of Christ or something. Games like the Stanley Parable, Gone Home, and more recently Undertale. Now we seem to be getting the same thing with a new indie game called Firewatch, an interesting looking walking simulator set in the Wyoming wilderness. Developed by Campo Santo, it's the game that people all seem to be talking about, so let's put our hiking boots on and dive right into this walking simulator, and see what all the fuss is about, shall we? Now the setting itself isn't entirely unique. I mean, I think we've all seen our fair share of first-person games set in the wilderness. But what makes Firewatch unique is the way it tells its story, and make no mistake folks, this is a very story-driven game. Through an interactive prologue sequence, we learn about a couple named Henry and Julia, and we're able to decide between one of two outcomes for various life events that occur between the two. As the story progresses, we learn that Julia begins showing early signs of dementia, which causes their relationship to fall apart. Unable to cope with the stress, Henry heads off to the Wyoming wilderness in 1989 to work as a fire lookout for the summer. His main point of contact with another lookout named Delilah.
It's Henry, right?
Yeah.
I'm Delilah.
At first, your only real goal or objective is to become familiar with your surroundings. You're given a compass and a map and head off to get the lay of the land. Soon into your tenure, you notice fireworks being set off and investigate to find a couple of teenage girls skinny dipping, and after scaring them off, you return to your tower to find the place ransacked, presumably by the aforementioned teenage girls.
They wrecked the place, threw my typewriter out the window.
It's at this point the plot becomes a bit more sinister, and it slowly becomes evident that there's something else going on entirely. The teenage girls are reported missing, and it becomes apparent that someone is following you. The rest of the game continues on with this narrative, jumping ahead throughout the summer as the game explores your relationship with Delilah and the looming threat of an unseen predator. Firewatch has some moments that I guess you could call suspenseful, but there's only really a handful of moments in the game when this happens. Most of the time you're moving around in broad daylight, exploring new corners of the map as the campaign progresses. There's not even any real threat, as there's no enemies or even a way to kill yourself as far as I could tell. It's not like the way ahead is always blatantly obvious, but as long as you can read a map, which often highlights where you need to go anyway, it's not going to be difficult in the slightest. Initially your only gear is, as I mentioned, the compass and the map, but you eventually get ropes used to propel down steep surfaces, then an axe and some other important items that may only require a single use. Aside from that, you'll also come across notes and other tidbits you can file away and read at a later time, though most of these are only pertinent when you initially find them. And the complete lack of any real puzzles means the game's only going to take as long to finish as you want it to. On a positive note, it's true that this is a fantastic looking game. I'd say a decent pair of headphones is a must, not only to fully appreciate the brilliant sound design, but also to increase the immersion. What I heard of the music was good as well, but there isn't very much of it, and the game relies on the atmosphere of the surroundings as its soundtrack. The level of detail with the wilderness is admirable, featuring lots of landmarks and distinguishable features, and the few interior areas also show off lots of attention to detail. It's a bit polarizing compared to the low quality of Henry's character model with his stumpy fingers and legs, but where it matters most, it's really an artistic and appealing game. And it's a good example of what happens when the Unity engine is put into the hands of people who know what the hell they're doing.
Well, it sounds just perfect.
The main focus on the game, though, is the relationship between Henry and Delilah. At first it seems like she's really just talking for the sake of talking, but as the campaign goes on, they start to have meaningful conversations. And she reveals a few things about her past that she's not too proud of, one of which has a direct correlation to the events in the game. Choosing a response is left up to the player. Often you've got 3 or so different responses, and there's also a timer that counts down, so you don't overthink your response too much.
You should tell whoever that I'm happy to be questioned.
None of these really have any huge effect on the game, but it does affect the way Delilah responds and treats you.
Pretty thick beard.
Oh, have you always had a beard?
Henry's voiced by Rich Sommer, who most people would probably know from Mad Men, and there's just something about this guy's voice that makes him so likable. I mean, I could listen to him read through the periodic table and not get bored.
Okay, I can do that. Where is it?
I think what makes the dialogue so good is that they talk like actual people. I mean, it doesn't feel ham-fisted or forced most of the time.
Can you believe you're actually getting paid to learn all of these amazing things?
There are a few moments when some of the dialogue can come off a bit cringeworthy, usually during those dialogue selections when Henry and Delilah are flirting with one another, but that's really nitpicking more than anything else. Seeing as Firewatch is such a story-driven game, there's not really much else to say about it without giving the whole thing away, but to be honest, there's not really much else to say about it anyway. Here's how most of the game plays out. The day starts, you talk on the radio for a bit, you leave your tower, you do something, then the next day begins. There is a huge map here which, as I said, is detailed, but there's nothing hidden or secret to find, and you're only allowed to go where the level designer allows you to. As the campaign progresses, it starts to make it out like there's something really big going on behind the scenes, but the ultimate truth as is revealed at the game's climax is a little bit anticlimactic, and the ending itself is a real letdown. When I saw those end credits roll, I kept hoping something else was going to happen, or there might be some kind of post-credits scene to resolve everything. But alas, Sonny Jim, there wasn't. There wasn't!
Can I go fix it?
None of the dialogue choices you make change the ending, kind of killing any real point to replaying through it. And after you spend 2 or 3 hours it takes to complete the whole thing, I see little reason to go back. It's all just par for the course for what we've come to expect from these walking simulators. Most of these games are just 2 or 3 hour distractions where you move through a fairly preset path, enjoying some highly polished environments, listening to well written and voice acted dialogue before it all comes to an end. I've got to say I'm a little bit turned off by the price though. I mean, $20 for something that's going to take most gamers no longer than 3 hours to get through seems very steep. Cut that in half though and you've got a good deal. But I am glad that Firewatch doesn't have any sort of PC agenda. It's just a story about a couple of people experiencing some freaky shit out in the woods, and it's really refreshing to play a game that doesn't have a political message or agenda. So if you're a fan of these types of no risk, no challenge games, then you'll be in gaming heaven. But for those of us looking for games with a bit more, gameplay, might